Hey everybody, this week on the show we got Brett Morris from Recovery Survey podcast and from Recovery Revolution Live. He's actually he's the first podcast host that had me on as a guest about 6 months ago, maybe. But he's also been a huge help in me getting the podcast started, answering information about social media when I was first getting started doing all of this. So Brett's a really great guy. He's got a really amazing story. I'm so happy to have him on the show. Due to some technical difficulties, this show will only be an audio file. I apologize for no video. It was a recording issue on my end and the app that I was using, so I apologize for that. Please enjoy the show. Brett, it's so wonderful to have you, man. We'd like it if you could just start off by giving us your story, man. Telling us, your backlog, your drunkalog, how you ended up in recovery.
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me on the show today. I'm really excited and grateful for the opportunity to share my story with you guys. I feel like my story's not all that unique. It's kind of, I feel like it's a lot of people's stories. You know, my youth started out in high school, and I just didn't ever feel like I fit in, didn't feel like I belonged, just didn't really have that sense of community and camaraderie. And I was introduced to marijuana and alcohol, and those things just made me seem to kind of chill out and feel more comfortable with myself and feel like I could handle those social situations. You know, it seemed to ease the social anxiety that I was experiencing. And it was kind of an odd situation. You know, I grew up and I was homeschooled, and so I didn't have as much social interaction as most people do. And most of my socialization was done at church and church activities and like homeschool events and stuff like that. And those are some pretty socially awkward people. And, you know, I started working at a pretty young age. I had my first part-time job when I was 12, and so I was out of the house and I was around older people. And, I was introduced to drugs and alcohol at a pretty young age, and that was kind of my first real social situation was having that job, you know, and being around those other people. And, it kind of stayed that way for pretty much all of high school. You know, drink on the weekends, you know, smoke a joint after work with some coworkers, like, you know, pretty tame stuff. And it just kind of became my new norm. And then I moved out and went to college for a very brief period of time. And having that new freedom of being out on my own, like, I was able to start experimenting and trying different drugs, and, started pretty heavy on coke. I really enjoyed doing that. And then, I could still remember the first time that I ever tried meth, and it was like, that's what I've been looking for. Like, this was the missing piece to my life, and I felt just like this crazy level of confidence, and there's like this really nice euphoric feeling from getting high, and it just seemed like everything that I was missing. I felt like I could be productive. I felt like I could be social. I felt like life was more pleasurable. And that's just how it was in the beginning of my meth use, but it didn't stay that way for very long. And people talk about like chasing that first high. And I don't know that I was ever chasing that first high, but I never could get that same feeling as that first time. But my life began to spin out of control pretty quickly once I started using meth, and, you know, the environments that I put myself in, the people that I surrounded myself with, the situations I was in. You know, at the end of my drug use, I was living with my meth dealer, and I knew that I needed to stop. I had this moment of like this realization that my life was not going in the way that I wanted it to go. And I remember calling my sister, and I just, you know, for the first time in a long time, got honest and said, hey, look, I've been using meth and my life is out of control and I don't know what to do. I'm living with my dealer. and she offered to let me come crash on her couch and kind of figure things out. And, I didn't have any kind of understanding about recovery. I didn't have any kind of context for recovery. Everything I knew about recovery was from things that I'd seen on TV and movies, so I didn't even really know about rehab or any of those kind of things. I knew rehab existed, but I knew that I didn't have the money to go to a rehab, and so I tried to do it on my own. I decided that the meth was my problem, and that I could continue to drink and smoke weed, which was always kind of my go-to spot. And so that's what I did. I put the meth down, and I started drinking, and I started drinking more heavily than I ever had before without those other substances in my body. And I was a pizza delivery driver at the time, and I was drinking all day, every day. So those two things mixed together are not a great combination. Drinking and driving is never a good idea. But at that point in my life, I just didn't have that concern. I didn't have any kind of thought about consequences or the repercussions of my actions. I just had that young, dumb mentality of like, I'm invincible, and nothing serious could ever happen to me. So this was probably about a month or so into me trying my own style of recovery, which I guess, now with a little bit of knowledge and hindsight, I realized that it would probably be categorized as harm reduction. So I was still drinking, but that was pretty much the extent of it, smoking a little bit of weed. And it was Super Bowl Sunday 2012. So we just passed the 10-year anniversary of this event. And I was on my way back to the shop to pick up some more pizzas. It was a busy night with it being Super Bowl Sunday. So everybody was taking like 3 or 4 deliveries per trip. Like they would organize it based on like the neighborhood that it was going to. So we were trying to be as efficient as possible and take multiple runs. So people were gone for, sometimes up to like an hour. If they had, if they ran into whatever, they would be gone doing multiple runs. So I was on my way back from one of these runs, and one of the bars down the street that I frequented, they were going out of business, and they decided that their last hurrah was going to be on Super Bowl Sunday. So everybody was showing up, and just like the normal bar crowd, all the regulars are there, and the bartenders are pulling bottles off the wall and passing them out to the regulars, and just everybody's having a good time. We're going to shut this bar down in style. And so I had gone by there before my shift, and I had consumed a good amount of liquor, and then I went back while I was working and got some more, grabbed another bottle and, like a little half bottle and chugged it and got back on the road. So that kind of sets the context for where I was at mentally and physically.
Right.
So I'm driving back to the pizza shop to pick up some more pizzas and go on another run. And I pass out while I'm driving. Like, I completely black out.
Holy
and even to this
shit.
day, I still just have like little fragments of what happened. Like, I can't remember the full event, but I pass out behind the wheel while I'm driving, and I slump over to my right towards the passenger side. And when I do that, I pull the wheel to my right, and as I'm going down the street, it's a residential street, so I'm going probably, 35, 40 miles an hour, something like that. And I sideswipe 3 parked cars, boom,
Holy
boom,
shit.
just like bounce off the side of them because I'm pulling towards the passenger side. And then I swerve into the front yard after I clear these 3 cars that I've just slid down the side of, and I end up going through their fence, and then I hit their house.
Whoa.
And that was the beginning of my recovery journey. I ended up going to jail, got probation, had to do some alcohol classes, had to do community service, the whole 9. And that was my first introduction to 12-step recovery. And, it took me a little while to get to that point where I was willing to actually give this thing a go.
Right.
I still had that mindset that I was just in the wrong place, wrong time. Like, you know, if the circumstances were a little bit different, maybe if I had had one less shot, like things would be okay. I hadn't come to the point where I could see the full picture and realize that I was suffering from an addiction and that I couldn't control it.
Right.
So I went in and out of the rooms for probably another, probably about 2 years or so. You know, I'd pick up 90 days and then go back out and come back in and get 60 days and then go back out. And, you know, just this revolving door of just little short periods of abstinence.
Right.
And I remember towards the end, or right before I got clean this time, I had a buddy that I had met in the rooms, and his name was Tim, and he said, "Hey man," this was after a meeting, like he pulled me aside because everybody would like stand outside and chain smoke and talk and stuff after the meeting. And I remember he pulled me aside and he put his hands on my shoulders and was like looking at me dead in the eyes. And he was like, "If you don't quit doing what you're doing, you're going to die, and we're going to be attending your funeral. Wow. And I love you too much to watch you do this to yourself."
That's powerful.
And that moment was the turning point for me. Like, I had heard all the jargon at the meetings, like some of it was starting to get through. I started to hear some of the messages and I could relate to some of the people sharing, but I wasn't really taking the whole thing seriously because I still wanted to do what I wanted to do. I didn't want to put down the drugs and the alcohol. And when he pulled me aside and we had that heart to heart, and I could see how sincere he was, I could see it in his eyes and I could hear it in the tone of his voice. And it was like, wow, somebody sees me, somebody loves me, somebody cares what I do. And that was the moment that was like, okay, it's time for me to turn my life around and give this recovery thing a shot. And that right. conversation happened a little over 7 years ago, man. And I haven't put a drop of alcohol or a single drug in my body since that day.
So that was basically, that was the beginning of my recovery journey. And, you know, that was a little over 7 years ago, and here I am today.
That's amazing. It kind of takes a few rounds, doesn't it, sometimes?
Absolutely. Yeah. I know there's a lot of people that get it on the first try, but I'm not one of those people. I'm very stubborn and hard-headed, and I have to hear things multiple times before they really sink in.
Mm-hmm. How soon, at what point did you get a sponsor?
Well, that was one of the stipulations of my probation in the beginning, was that I had to have a sponsor. So I quickly found like the easiest, most lax, chill person that I could find that didn't actually make me do anything, but would sign a piece of paper for my probation officer and tell her that I had a sponsor.
Right.
But after I had that talk and like actually started to take the whole recovery thing seriously, I ended up getting a sponsor within that first week or two. I can't remember exactly. I mean, it's been over 7 years now, but in that first couple of weeks, like I really wanted to prove to people that I was doing something different and that I was taking it serious. So that was one of the steps that I took, was I'm going to get a new sponsor, and I'm going to start doing this whole recovery process.
Yeah, there's a big difference between when it's put upon you in some way, or when you actually come to it yourself and choose it for yourself. I think that's when actual healing can probably take place. Before then, it's probably those just like brushes with it, and probably seeds are being planted, but maybe the growth isn't quite ready to happen yet.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think a big part is the connection and the accountability. You know, when we're trying to do it on our own, you know, I have absolutely, or at least back then when I was using, I had no problem lying to myself. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, I'm good. I'm just going to drink today, and I'm just going to get high today. I'll be all right. And it wasn't all right. It was a lie, you know. But then when I had my first sponsor, and it's like, now I got somebody who not only is expecting me to call, but is going to call me if I don't. Is going to, not just on the phone, but on life in general. You know what I mean? Like, going to call me on my bullshit. You know, I used to say that the greatest thing that 12-step recovery did for me was all of a sudden I had a place where now like I had someone who's going to teach me how to live a good way and give me a handbook on how to do it, walk me through that handbook, show me how to be a good person, and help me to how to understand how to have a higher understanding, have a relationship with a higher power of my understanding. You know what I mean? And like, I didn't know any of that. Like I had read tons of spirituality books and can tell you all cool things about like awesome psychedelic experiences and like meeting God that way. But like, I had no relationship with a higher power. I had no relationship, a personal relationship. Like now, like, RAINN and I talk about this, like, I don't pray. I have a running dialogue with God now, but sponsorship was huge in that. And because anytime I had a question about what to do, all I had to do is text somebody or call somebody and they gave me an answer. Like, I know for me, that was huge.
So can I ask both of you then, like for people who may be at a place in their journey where they haven't asked for a sponsor yet, or they don't feel confident yet quite asking for a sponsor, or what would you suggest? They're not sure who might be a good fit yet. Like they haven't met someone that feels like a good fit. What would you suggest?
Oh, that's a good question.
I would say a bad fit is better than no fit. Like, I haven't always worked with the same sponsor. My first sponsor, he's kind of one of those guys who works with you for like the first 90 days, gets you through the steps real quick. And then it's like, cool, man. Like you need to find somebody to work with long-term. He's like all about like, he's like a newcomer headhunter. So, I didn't just jump into bed with the next person. You know what I mean? Like I shopped around and, but the thing is like, you don't want to wait too long because especially in early recovery, because if you don't have that person to be accountable to, then it just like we talked about in the beginning, you know what I mean? Like you just end up bullshitting or like like Brett talked about, it's easy to like, oh, I'm going to go to a meeting after I drink today. You know what I mean? Like you said, it's the 100th time who's in their first 24 hours. And it's like, what are you building a bar stool out of chips? You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And some of the best advice that I've received is to look for someone that has qualities that you want to have. So that's what I've had multiple sponsors, and that's something that I've always done is I go to some of the same meetings and I look for those characteristics of other men and see things in them that I want to be. Like my current sponsor, before I asked him to be my sponsor, I noticed that he's a really kind and compassionate person, and he's very level-headed and just he seems like he's just full of serenity. I don't know a better way to describe it. Like he's just always just like super super chill. Like doesn't matter what else is going on in his life, whether it's a good day or a bad day. He just always seems like he's just level, and that was something that was attractive to me because I feel like my emotions are still kind of up and down sometimes. Like work is stressful and I'm angry, and something good happens, I'm happy, and it's just kind of like up and down. And it's like I want to be more like him, so I'm going to ask him. But I agree with what Rex said. Like you don't want to be in that spot where you wait too long, because then you just end up the accountability piece is huge. To have somebody that's, like you said, call you out on your bullshit. Like that was a huge part, because like I want to pick a sponsor that goes to my meeting, so if I start missing meetings or whatever, like somebody's going to notice, and then they can be like, hey, haven't seen you in a week, what's going on?
Yeah. And there's also a lot of the true program or programs, I'll say, is in the work with a sponsor. Like there's a lot of things that you don't learn until you speak to other people in the program, or that you don't understand. You can only read the book so many times, and then a lot of the deeper things are actually conveyed in that in the rooms, or with a sponsor.
Raina will attest to this. I'm kind of I'm addicted to learning. So is she. And we or one of the things that I like to do is I love the appendix in the back of the AA Big Book, Spiritual Experience. About there's I don't remember exactly what it is, but it talks about there's no greater spiritual malady than contempt prior to investigation. So I wanted to be the best sponsor that I could for the guys that I worked with. So I didn't just study the Big Book. I studied Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers and AA Comes of Age and Came to Believe, the little book that talks about those three words and like the huge meaning, like came means to arrive, to came to means to have awoken, you know, and like came to believe, you know, awakening to the idea that we're not alone. And like there's another little book, I can't remember what it's called, but it's like letters written. It's like a little pamphlet book. It's like 70 pages, but it's like little things that people just wrote to kind of help newcomers. You know what I mean? Like I wanted to know, it's kind of like the Supreme Court. They don't just look at the law. They look at what was the intent behind the law kind of thing. So like when I got to a point, you know, and my brain started to clear up and I was like, oh, okay, so I'm all in on this. Like when I started doing it for parole. I was on parole and I relapsed and I was like afraid I was going to go back to jail. Truthfully, I say it was because I was afraid for my life, but the reality was I was afraid for my freedom, if you want to be 100% honest. And so my goal was, all I got to do is I got sober in January the first time, and I was like, all I got to do is make it till August. If I can just make it till August, then I'm good. I can get high, do whatever I want, and I got to worry about it. It was around July that I think it was after I went to my first Colorado conference of young people in AA. It was like June of that year. And I was like, man, like, this is cool. I can be sober and have fun, still play poker, still talk to chicks, still hang out with my friends, still go shoot pool at the bar. Because now I have a protective bubble. And like it talks about in the Big Book, like we can go anywhere if our motives are right. So like, I'm not going to the bar to like live vicariously through the people drinking, looking for answers in the bottom of a glass. I'm going there for the connection and the fun, and so that life still happens, even though I'm not trying to kill myself on the installment plan anymore. So I just, I wanted to be the best sponsor that I could. So I wanted to know the intent behind the steps, you know, and like, RAINN, she can talk about this a little bit, but she's been going to adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. And, they said, like, they talk about how, and like, and I know this from like reading a lot about Bill and the things that he did after the AA World Services was kind of formed, and that I don't remember what year it was, but I think it's when they ratified the concepts that year. Bill kind of went on a spiritual journey, and he said that the next progression from physical sobriety was emotional sobriety. And like, that's a big thing with me. It's like, I did a lot of physical sobriety, but it wasn't until I really looked at the root causes of why I felt the need to put a needle in my arm, why I felt the need to smoke a crack pipe or drink. I hate drinking. I hate the way it tastes, unless it's like some foo-foo weird, like a purple hooter or some like weird, crazy syrupy drink. I don't like to taste alcohol. So, but I would drink because I would rather be fucked up than feel the way I felt. So like when I decided almost 8.5 years ago, I decided that I needed to heal the trauma. I needed to figure out the root causes, and 12 steps gave me all the insight to what that was. It gave me the tools and the knowledge to dig deeper and to figure out how that was. And like, so, I mean, like, is that part of your journey? Like, did you have to go back and figure out what it was that kind of made you feel better by drinking, what it was about drinking and getting high that made you feel better, what it was about yourself that you didn't like to feel, that made it okay?
Yeah, definitely. For me, I think a lot of it stemmed from just feeling social anxiety. And I shared this on another podcast, and some people think it's really interesting, but I was homeschooled K through 12. So I didn't I didn't go through like the normal schooling process. And I think that played part of a role in it, because I didn't really feel like I did some socializing, but like I grew up in going to church. Like my family is very religious, and so that was like almost the extent of my socialization was church and church activities. um, and so I think some of it, especially in the beginning, was like just like that deep seated rebellion in me of just like, I don't agree with what's happening. So like, this is the way that I stick it to the man, like, fuck you guys. I'm going to do what I want. Um, and I think a lot of it came back to that social anxiety and just not feeling like I had a normal childhood, and not really knowing how to have conversations with people. Like that's something that I've developed since I've gotten into recovery. I've become a lot more comfortable being with people. I mean, if you had asked me a few years ago if I would ever have a podcast or something, I would be like, hell no. Like I don't want to talk to people. Like just let me stay in my own little space and be happy and content where I'm at. But that's one of the gifts that I found in recovery, is just learning how to heal that trauma, being able to identify what it is. Because a few years ago I probably couldn't have told you that I had social anxiety and that I didn't like being around people. And if you ask my wife today, she'd be like, "You're such an outgoing person, and you talk to everybody," and that's something that's new for me. So I don't see myself as being like a social person. I would still label myself as an introvert, but I guess I'm an introvert that's like a weird hybrid of like partially like a outgoing introvert. Maybe, I don't really know.
Well, and Gabor Mate says that about addiction, that it's about a dislocation of people, that they feel disjointed and unconnected in some way. But that's usually at the core of most people's addiction. So, and that can be from all sorts of different things, that make us feel disconnected in different ways.
So how'd you get started on the podcast?
Man, that's a good question. And I feel like I get asked that almost every time I give an interview, and I don't feel like I have like any kind of great, profound answer to that. Um, I feel like my higher power was kind of telling me that it's what I was supposed to do. I just had this idea one day when I was at work. I was listening to a different recovery podcast, and I was like, man, I need to do this. And so then I started doing some research, and I ordered like a $20 mic on Amazon, and I recorded some really terrible promos that never aired and that no one besides my wife has ever heard. And I put together a couple episodes and decided to start a podcast. And right after the first episode aired, in my area is when the COVID lockdown started and everybody was stuck at home. And to me, there was just kind of this moment of like, that was why you were supposed to start a podcast, was because now people in your home group and all around the world that are used to going to meetings and staying connected with other people in recovery, here's another way for them to continue and get like little pieces of recovery, even if they're stuck at home. So it's just kind of crazy though, just the timing of the whole thing. Cause I had these grand plans of like, I'm going to interview people in person, and I'm going to, I had all these different ideas for the podcast, and then, here everybody is stuck at home. And I quickly started finding people on social media and like doing Zoom calls and recording them. And here we are almost 2 years later, man. Like it's crazy to think that just like the impact that I can have on people. Like I didn't ever have any plans, like a lot of people that I've talked to, when they talk, they're like, if you're going to start a podcast, you need to have a plan, and you need to record 10 episodes, and you need to promote on social media and like blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I didn't do any of that. Like I just started talking and hit record and then started posting it. Like there was no planning at all. It just kind of happened.
Yeah, I've kind of just experienced that. I just published my book, and I did it the totally wrong way. Like I went about it backwards and ended up self-publishing. And but then I was like, talking with a buddy of mine. He'll be a guest on the show here. And we were talking about doing Instagram lives every week. He goes into schools and talks to middle schoolers and high schoolers about drug prevention and stuff like that. And he gets a lot of questions. So he talked about, he started using late in life. He comes from really strict Mormon family, and he didn't even start using anything, any intoxicant at all, until he was 32. So he's like, there's levels to the questions that they ask that I can't answer. So he, we were going to kind of like team up on it. But in talking to him just about that, he was like, bro, he's like, I read the book. He's like, you have to do a podcast. He's like, seriously. He's like, you just have to. And I was like, well, all right, let me look into it. And then I looked into it, and like, I talked to you. You were a big help. You answered a lot of my questions early on. And then, the old Mr. Wizard, Google, like, if you can't find it on Google, I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can't find on there that's like, you know what I mean? But like basic stuff, it's really on there. But in that process, like, I have learned how to podcast, how to build a website. I learned what SEO is. I learned about keyword phrases and keywords and all these different things. And I feel like this whole journey, through not preparing, like the most preparing I did, I think I made a flyer on Canva. And like every once in a while, I've got an app that it's like text on photo. So I'll add some stuff on it and be like, oh, 1 week to go, 6 days to go. Like, that was the most promotion I did. This is the second episode we're recording, so I didn't do any advanced recording.
Nothing wrong with that, man. Sorry about that. I had my phone on Do Not Disturb, and for some reason that call still came through. So I don't know what's
I didn't hear it.
Oh, cool.
Did you hear it?
I didn't hear it, but that happens to me sometimes when I have my meditation app on. It's supposed to be doubly blocked, and it still sometimes will. So I don't know what that's about. But
well, if neither one of you heard it, then it didn't happen.
Yep.
I'm a professional, damn it.
So you touched on the whole COVID thing. So since right before COVID started, 2019, drug overdoses have become the number one killer of adults between the ages of 18 and 64. It surpassed cancer, surpassed heart disease, and in the past 2 years, it's surpassed COVID. I personally, and I'm not the only one, there are probably millions of people who share this opinion, but I believe that a big part of it is because if you look at the relapse rates, if you look at the fact that they're shutting down meetings, like, this is the thing that I thought was crazy. It's like liquor stores and medical marijuana and recreational dispensaries are essential. You know what I'm saying? But like church and AA and NA and 12-step recovery meetings aren't essential. They were closed down. And I think that, we kind of started this conversation talking about connection. And I think a big part of that is the drug overdoses and the relapse rate is because of the lockdowns. If you look at, people need connection. We need to touch each other. We need to hug each other. We need to talk to each other. We need to interact with each other. And addicts and alcoholics especially, we need to relate with each other. We need to know that, man, I'm not the only one who fucking had a shit day today. You know what I mean? Like, I need to go hear about somebody else's worst day or hear about somebody's great day. So I can be like, okay, cool. There still are good days. You know what I mean? This too shall pass. But have, you go to meetings and stuff. Have you noticed like people dropped off or people missing that you've kind of heard bad news?
I don't know that I've heard any bad news about anybody in particular, but I've seen those same statistics that you're talking about, and it's just heartbreaking, man, just to see how devastating this pandemic has been on the recovery community. And I totally agree with you on the whole connection thing. There's a quote, and I can't remember who said it, but they said the opposite of addiction is connection. And I believe that. Like, that was the missing piece for me in my recovery, because I tried to do it solo and was not successful for any substantial length of time. And that's been the thing that's that's been so vital to me in my recovery is just finding other people that have been through similar situations, people that understand that kind of pain and suffering that we go through. Like my wife is a normie. Like she doesn't understand when I talk about like back in the day. Like she doesn't understand that. Like I'll tell her stories and stuff, and she'll just be like, "That doesn't even sound like something you would do." I was like, "You don't even know the half of it. Like I'm a totally different person today, and that's because of recovery and the 12 steps. But like I used to do some fucked up shit, man. Like you
Yeah.
don't even want to know. Like my wife just doesn't get it, and that's the beautiful thing about the connection that we have with one another in recovery is like I can say some pretty terrible things, and the person sitting next to me is like, "Oh yeah, I've done that too," or "I've done something similar to that," and there's just like
Yeah.
that camaraderie, man. It's almost like the camaraderie that vets have with one another because they've been to war and like they understand, they've seen some of that same shit and like they've gone through it, and that's kind of what it's like for us in recovery. Like we've been through that same shit, so it's like, yeah, we get it, like we understand what it's like.
Well, the reality is that we are veterans of America's longest running war.
Yeah.
You know, we're POWs. We've been prisoners of war. We're, like the world is finally starting to awaken and understand that, like, hey, maybe these drug addicts and alcoholics aren't really criminals. Maybe there's a mental health aspect to it. Because I have done almost 15 years in the system, prisons, halfway houses, county jails. I have been an addict actively using or drinking since 1986 to 2013 with a few years break in there off and on. And I have never met an addict or an alcoholic or an overeater or an adult child of alcohol, any of them who doesn't have some mental health issues. And it's not, and I've met, especially with alcoholics, a lot of them I've met started off just partying, didn't really have bad childhoods. Nothing was really wrong, but they liked to party too much.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they tried to stop and couldn't stop, that was the trauma. That was the, oh shit, well, now I'm fucked, so I might as well just keep going. You know what I mean? But it's like there's always some level of, like we said, disconnection. I love that quote, man. The opposite of addiction is connection. That's great. I love that.
I completely agree with you too. I think people who feel connected and important in some way, vital to other people, they they have a different sense of worth about themselves. And it's not, it's never about blame. It's not that like our parents did everything wrong or society is this, that, or the other. I mean, this is just a part of our life at this point in time, where families, there's really a lot of dysfunction going around, it's a real deal. Um but I agree, underneath even this addiction, there's this pain and disconnection. And if that part isn't looked at, I think the connection is absolutely vital for recovery. The ability to be vulnerable and still be accepted and held and received is vital to recovery.
We had a conversation with a buddy the other day on one of the episodes we were recording, and we talked about spiritual synchronicity, but we also talked about being grateful for the struggle. That in hindsight now, where I am, thank God for that shit that I went through as a kid and as a teenager and as an adult, and like, thank God for all of the struggle, because I'm good. You know what I mean? Like I now have this resolve and life experience and resiliency, but also not just the tough stuff. Like I got so tough that I became soft. Like I'm vulnerable now. I allow myself to feel. I allow myself to emote. I get angry when I'm angry. I get sad when I'm sad. I don't try to bottle it up and wait for the cork to blow and that be my reason to become a human pincushion again. You know, I was saying part of the conversation, you made me think about it, Raina, was you have to feel worthy, you have to feel value. So when I tried to take my own life and that didn't work, I felt like a failure, but I was like, but I'm also a big believer that everything happens for a reason. So that was like, okay. And then the first time I got sober, I had people who genuinely cared about me, that when I relapsed, they came and brought me to meetings. They were like, we don't care, man, not out at the meeting, just come to the meeting. So for that hour and a half, we know you're good. So that, coupled with the fact that my life didn't end, started to show me that I had value. And then when I'm sitting in county jail and my best friend's crying, asking me when I'm going to quit jipping him out of his life, I was like, holy shit, this dude's not going to stop loving me. There's something about me that has value. And that's like she was just saying, you know, it wasn't until I saw the value in other people's eyes that I started to look for it with my own eyes. And that was the real beginning of the transformation and change that, you know, here we are today.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I can even attest to that with my story, man. Like I was at that place where I didn't feel like I mattered to anyone else. And then that buddy of mine pulled me aside and like, you know, had that hard talk. And that was like, that was it. Like I felt like, okay, here's somebody that actually cares. Like he sees me. He sees that I'm struggling, and he's letting me know like if you don't change you're gonna die, and like it's gonna affect me because I love you and I want you to be a part of my life, so like get your shit together, man.
And
Yeah.
that's, oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just gonna just touch on just the pain that our addictions cause other people. Like we're just so in the midst of our own experience, we're not able to understand our impact. And then once we can really feel that, we're like, wow, you know, I'm so sorry. You know, thank you for loving me anyway.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that's when the lie gets shattered. It's like, you know, because we as addicts, we're like, oh, you know, fuck you, it's my life. You know what I mean? Like, to, you know, I'm not hurting anybody but myself. And that's the biggest lie. That's the biggest lie. Because then somebody eventually, if we're lucky, confronts us, you know, holds a mirror up to us and is like, yo, you know, you're lying. You're full of shit. You don't even believe yourself, you know?
Yeah. Thank goodness for all this stuff, huh?
So tell me a little bit about Recovery Revolution. Tell the people who don't know.
Yeah, for sure, man. So that's kind of a newer project for me. We've been doing it for let's see, like 5 months or so now. I'm trying to think because we've done like 20 odd episodes. We do one a week, so yeah, about 5 months now. So I had approached J.R. Weaver. He wrote a book called The Addiction Manifesto, and I didn't even know that he had this Facebook page. But he has a Facebook page called Recovery Revolution, and so I sent him a message on, I think it was Instagram, like, "Hey man, want to have you on the show. Love what you're doing." You know, I love reaching out to authors, you know, because they bring like this whole different perspective to things, and I feel like they make really great guests for podcasts. So that's that's kind of how Rex and I met too. Like I seem to find sober authors and have a lot of them on my show. And so he and I were messaging back and forth on Instagram a little bit, and he was like, "Well, I'm pretty busy right now. I got a lot going on, but would you be interested in starting a podcast with me?" And my first thought was like, "No, man. Like I already have a podcast. Like I'm trying to get you on mine. Like I don't want to start one with you." And so we kept talking for a little bit, and he had some cool ideas. He was like, "I'm wanting to do video. I'm wanting it to be live. Like I have this Facebook page, and we have a bunch of followers on there, and I think it'd be really cool to be able to interact with people live and like answer recovery questions and have different interviews and you know, something again, probably my higher power. You know, I think it was my higher power. Something was tugging me and saying like, you need to do this. So he and I discussed it a little bit more, and I found his Facebook page, and I hopped on there and I was like, holy shit, this guy has like 250,000 people on this Facebook page. Like this guy's got something going on. Like I had no idea that he was a part of this page. I just knew about his book. And so he and I talked a little bit, and I had never done video at all. Like I was strictly audio only podcast, and that's what I had been doing for, almost 2 years. So I did like any good addict, and I just like became obsessed with this idea of doing a live stream, and I like watched every YouTube video and read every blog article, and like became an expert on live streaming in like 3 days, and ordered a couple pieces of equipment and like got stuff set up, and then he and I started doing weekly episodes, and then a couple months into it, he decided that he wanted to take a step back from it, because he's also working on, he just got his nonprofit status, the same name as the Facebook page, Recovery Revolution, and he's trying to do all kinds of cool stuff in his community. He's from South Carolina, so he's trying to do like scholarships for people to go to rehab and help people pay for sober living, and like do all kinds of really cool things in his community. So he's kind of taken a step back from the live stream, and we've connected with a few other people. And so now it's a 3-person show, and then we do interviews. So it's me, and then there's another podcast host named Carl. He hosts a show called the Drunken Worm Podcast, and the third host is Ashley Grimes, and she is the NAMI Florida president. So she does a lot of advocacy work for the recovery community, and she has more of a clinical background, and knows a lot about like destigmatizing language, and like the different laws and things that Florida is doing to like try to help in the stigma and like help people in recovery. So it's a really cool mix. And and Carl works at a rehab, so there's like this really cool mix of like professionals, and all 3 of us have lived experience, and then we have different guests on. Like last night we had a guest on from Australia who's a big advocate for mental health, and we just go on for however long. Some episodes are like an hour, and we've had several that are closer to 2 hours, and it's been really cool because we have that live interaction. There's that chat box where people can jump on there and ask questions and give
sounds fun.
And yeah, dude, it's awesome. Like I feel like that's just helping further my reach, like helping get that recovery message out there. And it's really cool just to have those conversations, not only with the guests, but with the people that are also watching live, and being able to ask questions like, hey, I'm struggling. What do you guys think I should do? Or, my favorite ones are when there's like new people on there that just ask like, hey, what did you do in your first 30 days? What did you do the first 90 days? Like asking those newcomer questions and being able to like have that dialogue. And, I'll even hop on there and like get in a private chat and be like, hey, here's my cell phone number. Text me after we get off the live. And there's several people that I've met through that I talk to, a couple times a week. It's awesome, man.
That's incredible, man.
Well, and it's just it's a really beautiful evolution of the recovery movement. How cool that like this aspect of it has grown from the whole COVID thing, and it kept a lot of people continued to meet the way they could, so it that part of it does show something. It's a good part of it.
And when does that air? When is that live?
Yeah, so we do that every Thursday night, 7 p.m. Central is when we start, or I believe that's 8 Eastern.
Yep.
I'm terrible with time zones. That's why I love like scheduling apps and stuff, because it does the conversions for me, man. Like in the beginning, I was just like sending people messages and then having to try to figure out the time zones, and I'm not good at time zones. So
for those who don't know, that's 8 Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, and 5 Pacific.
Yep. 5 Pacific.
Yeah,
and that's the
3 Hawaiian
too. Is we're all over the country too. So like the hosts, like everybody's time zone there is different too, and it's
3 p.m. in Hawaii. Well, Brett, it was great having you on, man. Like I said, you got Recovery Survey, Recovery Revolution Live. People can find all of your links and all of your info in the show notes. We'll have that attached to everything. Thanks for having me on when you did. Thanks for being on now. It was great talking to you. Nice having a conversation with you.
Absolutely, man. I'm so honored that you asked me to come on, and I'm the first guest, no less. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So if anybody's interested in hearing Rex's episode, search Recovery Survey, or like you said, it's going to be in the show notes. He was episode 78. So if you're looking for that in your podcast app, you're going to have to scroll down a little ways, but he's on there, number 78.
I also wanted to congratulate on the 100th episode. That was a really good show. I really dug that. That was fun.
Thanks, man. Yeah, and you had a little small part. Yeah. So for the people that haven't heard it, like I sent messages out to a bunch of previous guests and stuff, and it was just like, hey, could you record like a 60-second, 2-minute like little clip, and just like compiled a whole bunch of different clips from previous guests and people shouting out the show and giving like encouragement for people in recovery and just all kinds of cool stuff. And I think it turned out really, really awesome, man. So thank you for sending that message in.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everyone. That's Brett Morris from Recovery Survey. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, guys.
Take it easy, brother. Namaste.
Take care.
Hi. Thanks for listening to the show today. If you or anyone you know is in need of help, please feel free to reach out to us at our website, nolovepodcast.com, or follow any of the links in the show notes. You're not alone. You don't have to face anything alone. There is help.